Welcome to panel number 3, the BPD Bunch Cast on functional recovery. We are delighted that you could join us today. My name is Sara Rosenberg, and I will be moderating the panel as a volunteer for Emotions Matter. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just a moment. All right. So Emotions Matter's mission is we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 2015 to support, educate, and advocate for people with borderline personality disorder. And our vision is to create a world in which every person with BPD has access to treatment and resources to achieve a meaningful recovery. And you can find us at www.emotionsmatterbpd.org. Emotions Matter strives to create a safe, judgment-free space for people with borderline personality disorder. We accept that there's a spectrum of experiences within the BPD community. We honor where people are on the journey without judgment or assumptions. We encourage people to define their own path towards recovery. We speak as experts of our own lived experience, not as medical experts. Some guidelines for community engagement. Questions during the sessions should be asked using the Q&A box. Use respectful language. Any inappropriate messaging, including harassment, bullying, or monopolizing, will be deleted. We accept difference and promote acceptance, especially with regard to gender, sexual orientation, identity, race, ethnicity, age, religion, disability, or politics. Avoid explicit expressions of self-harm or trauma, which may be upsetting to others. Panels and plenary sessions will be recorded and available after the conference. No screenshots or recording on personal devices. And we have some safety guidelines and disclaimers. If at any time during BPDFest24 you find yourself overwhelmed, struggling, or for any reason in need of support, we encourage you to reach out to your support system. Audience members may experience intense and painful emotions, feelings, memories, thoughts, and/or reactions to content shared. Participate at your own risk. You're always welcome to take a break from BPDFest24 at any time or withdraw from it entirely. In the event of a medical, including mental health emergency, please seek care through a doctor, hospital, or emergency call number, such as 988 or 911 in the United States immediately. And I'm gonna turn it over right now to the panelists for the BPD Bunch.
Hey everyone, welcome to this special episode of the BPD Bunch. We're coming to you live from BPD Fest 2024. Thank you so much to Emotions Matter for having us here today. In case you've never seen an episode of our show, the BPD Bunch is a video podcast. We have a panel of people who are in functional recovery from borderline personality disorder. And in each episode, a few of us get together to discuss the ups and downs of our journeys so that we can give hope and direction for yours. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Lena, Madhurima, and Katja. Where in the world is everyone coming from today?
I'm currently in Belo Horizonte, Brazil.
I'm coming from Kolkata in India.
And I'm West Midlands, United Kingdom.
And I'm coming from New Mexico in the United States. I love this very diverse group we've got going today. So for our episode today, we're going to be talking about BPD recovery, how we define it, what it looks like for us, and a little backstory to how we got here. So you may have heard in the beginning, I use the term functional recovery. At the moment, there isn't a standard way to describe recovery from BPD. And that's why we came up with this term, functional recovery, to signify a state where an individual has progressed sufficiently to do the things that matter to them, and they perceive their lives as worth living. In functional recovery, individuals no longer show BPD symptoms as much. Some may no longer meet criteria for the disorder, while others are on the verge of no longer meeting criteria. There might still be some residual challenges and symptoms to manage. Now, I realize that to some degree, this is kind of a vague definition, but that is a little bit on purpose because from my perspective, I think it's important that when people are working on recovery, that they are trying to do the things that are important to them and what they want for their own lives, than just kind of arbitrarily checking off things on a list. And so obviously there do need to be some kinds of external, some level of a standard, but as an example, it wouldn't really make sense if there was some number of important relationships that you maybe needed to attain, because depending on how extroverted or introverted you are, maybe like for me, I'm extremely extroverted. My life is meaningful if I'm able to maintain lots and lots of connections. Someone who may be more introverted, to them, being able to have 2 close friends, that might be a real significant change for them. And so that's kind of why we have it. It's basically the in-between space between really having BPD and maybe being your average person. And so over the course of this episode, we're going to be sharing our own stories as a way to kind of flesh this out so that you can try to figure out how this makes sense in your life. And I want to direct this over to Lena, who is not only a cast member with lived experience of BPD, but is also a therapist who works with clients who have BPD. And so, Lena, I want to ask you, when clients come to you and they're trying to figure out what recovery might look like for them or how they know when they're there, how do you conceptualize it when you're talking to them?
Well, I first want to say that functional recovery, from my perspective, and really kind of in line with DBT sort of stages of recovery, is not necessarily a linear thing. It's not necessarily a place you get to and you stay there. I think all of us have probably had experiences where, myself, even a couple months ago, I've been in recovery for years at this point, but I had an episode. I deal with a lot of disability and chronic pain, and I had a flare-up that kind of brought up a lot of my symptoms, right? And I think from my perspective, I really like to emphasize that with clients because it's not black and white. It's not you're in recovery or you're not. And that's why we call it functional recovery. It's not that I'm recovered from BPD, I'm in functional recovery from it. Because I also really believe that BPD isn't a thing that I need to fix. There are a lot of powers and sort of strengths that BPD gives me, being a really sensitive person. And so, I'm a DBT therapist. So I really think about recovery, again, not in a linear way, but there are certain stages that we go through. We might kind of go in and go out, but generally we sort of see it in DBT as you start with, more sort of self-harming, self-destructive, more sort of outward behaviors potentially. And then stage 2 is what we call quiet desperation. It's where maybe you're not acting out or, harming yourself anymore, but you still are really in a lot of pain, really struggling. And that's where we do a lot of that trauma work. And sometimes those 2 stages come together. Again, it's not a linear thing because we can't always stop the self-harm until we work on the trauma, and sort of vice versa, right? But stage 3 is really the what I see as functional recovery, which is where we talk about working on quality of living behaviors, right? Where you're working on Xannie, you said, building more relationships, or getting into a career path that's important to you, achieving things that are important to you, kind of more working on sort of life stuff. But you might still deal with intense emotional pain, but not all the time in the same way that we do before we get into more of this functional recovery place.
Well, now that we've kind of given a couple of different sort of definition spaces, I want to now open up the discussion to our cast as a whole and talk about what does functional recovery look like for you in your life. So Katja, Madhurima, do either of you want to hop in?
Yeah, so I think for me, mine is a little bit of a struggle because although I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and the other personality disorder that I have, I never actually received any treatment beyond medication. So there was never anyone to tell me what functional recovery looked like or whether I was doing it right or not. So it was quite difficult at times for me to really tell whether I was recovering or not. So I've had to use my own sort of barometer, looking at past behaviours, past attitudes, and how they compare to now. And I think for me, one of the most noticeable things is definitely an improvement in overall emotional intelligence. So before, it was never the case that I didn't have any at all, but there were definitely areas where it was severely impaired. So for example, I have always been reasonably self-aware, but the self-management of it wasn't there. And I've definitely noticed that in recent years with the work that I've done on myself, that has improved massively. And I think as well, I always internalized things, and I convinced myself that as long as I wasn't causing any problems to anyone around me, that meant that I must be recovered. But actually I was neglecting myself and how I felt on the inside. So it's definitely been a journey of finding things that work and then maybe thinking that things work and they actually don't. So yeah, it's definitely been very up and down for me.
For me, the more symptom of BPD, for me, the symptom of BPD that I usually struggle with the most was splitting, because everything was too black and white for me all my life. Until the day I was diagnosed, I used to believe that there's either a morally 100% right thing or a 100% wrong thing, and you can't be or support anything which is in between, which made living in general as a human being very, very hard, because as a human being, you have to allow yourself to make mistakes. And I didn't, because to me, even if the smallest of mistake would mean that I would be entitled to a much, much larger punishment than it entailed. And since I've been in recovery, I've mostly learned to see that things almost always have a gray area in between. It's not 100% right, or it's not 100% wrong. And the same goes for people. And it was so hard for me to maintain interpersonal relationships, because I used to be so judgmental on myself and on others, because I used to grade them on a scale that, okay, so you are not this person, you do not have this quality in my head, which means you're not a good enough person to hang out with, and so I'll just cut you off my life. But that was a very ineffective way of communicating and to maintain relationships. And I lost a lot of my friends and a lot of my family that way. So after I got into recovery, I have seen myself be more compassionate, come to the gray area, and understand people and accept them as who they are. And the path that led me there was the journey of accepting myself as who I am. And that has helped me with most of it. So, I mean, recovery just looks like a lot more like acceptance. And I'm going to quote one of my favorite artists here, that I used to see the world in black and white, but now I see it in colors.
Yeah, the black or white thinking was definitely really big for me. And I think what's interesting, since you brought up that aspect, you know, for me, functional recovery is not, a lot of these things are not eliminated. They are just made a lot smaller. And at some point, I wonder to myself, like, does this really count as BPD anymore? Like, I don't know. But, you know, as an example, like you were talking about these really extreme thoughts about people. And I used to use splitting as kind of a justification, especially if somebody hurt my feelings. I would think, oh, well, now I'm justified in like being extremely vindictive and saying a bunch of horrible, mean things to you because that's going to even the scales and da 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 da. And I destroyed a lot of relationships by just being extremely explosive in response to things that, you know, sometimes people were being really unkind, but other times it was more like it was just my interpretation. And now I still have moments where maybe I think for a split second, I have that like, that internal, that ick where you're like, oh, I gotta react to this. But I don't immediately jump to the action of being explosive. And so I think in a general sense, functional recovery for me really just looks like muting a lot of those things, and also space. There's so much more space in my mind, like time-wise, than there used to be. It used to feel like things just hit me out of nowhere for no reason, and I wasn't in control. Like I was sharing my body with some kind of demon. And now it's more just like, oh, I can, on average, take the time to think about how I want to react to things. And I really couldn't do that before.
Yeah, I would say even, the thing I've been really reflecting on lately in my own recovery is how I think I agree with you, Xannie, mute myself a lot, because I could end a relationship like that, if I got really angry at somebody, it was done, I shared recently with a client that, in college I had a fight with a girl I was friends with, and I went to the party she was at and I pulled her out of the party and broke up with her as a friend on the front lawn, told her all these horrible things that I thought about her. And I don't do that anymore. I really have to, take a pause. And the thing that's interesting about my recovery now is how I'm actually having to learn how to undo that now, where, like, for example, in my relationship, sometimes my partner and I will both get dysregulated and we'll pull away, and that kind of leaves the other person actually feeling really alone. And so the thing we've been really working on is going to the other and saying, I'm really dysregulated. Can we just hug for a moment? Or I just want to sit and hold your hand and look into your eyes while I take a moment to regulate. So really learning how to regulate in relationship, it's so foreign to me. It doesn't make any sense, because usually, like, I've learned to just kind of pull myself away, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to hurt somebody, right? And I feel like my next, sort of level of recovery is learning how to not pull away and to say, like, that really hurt me, or I'm having a really hard time with what you said. Oh, it's really hard to be vulnerable that way. It's so hard.
Yeah, that vulnerability. I gotta say, like, in some ways, that initial learning how to take a step back and walk out was in a way a little bit easier, because it was like all I had to do was notice that my emotions were getting intense and walk out. I mean, and that at the time it felt impossible. But then, I don't know, it's interesting. I'm aware that I don't want to make it sound like it just gets harder. I think it's harder. It's hard in a different way. It's, I think it felt harder to, like, put a stop in there from, like, a functioning perspective. And now it's more like from a fear perspective. It feels scarier to put my heart out there and be like, please don't hurt me. Please. But, I also think one of the major features for functional recovery for me, I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but, like, I really used to kind of self-sabotage by intention, not intentionally, consciously, but I sought out people who would treat me badly, because that's what I thought I deserved. And then I would have all these miserable, horrible relationships. And so I think a big piece of functional recovery for me is being way more intentional about the people I surround myself with, and not trying to go out of my way to put myself in the path of people who are behaving in ways where I'm pretty sure they're going to harm me.
And, like, surrounding yourself with people who are bad for you, kind of just for me, I think it made, like, it was an excuse that I knew that it was going to end anyway. So I had an excuse to cut it off and walk away. And I could say to everyone that it was not meant to last anyway. And this was a very damaged thing. And I don't want to be a part of this thing. But somewhere in the subconscious, I think I was choosing people. I was choosing the damage because I identified with the damage. And it was a whole cycle. And the vulnerability is very scary, but I think the reward is greater here. I mean, cutting off people, it has left me with some bit of regret, obviously, and it's obviously very scary to, like, just trust people and, like, let them in and be all vulnerable. But if you're choosing the right person to do it with, I think you're gonna feel good about it. I mean, that's my experience.
Yeah, I think you make your, it's, when it's with the right people that you can trust, it's scary, and also it's really cool, because that feeling of when you pull away and people are like, wait, where are you going? It's like, oh, you want me around. I think a lot of us, I think the thing, I talk about this in our episodes incessantly, but I think the thing for me that most characterizes BPD is shame more than anything else. And I think that even into recovery, we carry that shame with us, right? Where again, that's why we pull away, right, when we're feeling an urge to act out or whatever, right? Is because we're like, I'm, like Xannie even referred to, like, I'm like, there's this demon inside of me, right? And so it's a real undoing of that to say like, oh, I actually am going to stay even when I'm feeling dysregulated.
Yeah. And there's also a real sense of like competence that comes from being able to like sit in those moments and like find about like being able to hold space. I used to not be able to, I could hold space for myself or someone else, never both at the same time. And like when you get to a point where now I feel like I am able to do that more often than not, I feel a much greater sense of competence and confidence that I can handle other things in my life, even if I am not totally sure what challenges are going to come my way. One of the, since we're talking about like being in recovery, I did want to kind of just do a quick round of, what were some of the things that helped you get into the state of recovery that you're in now?
I think for me, it was realizing that actually no one else was going to do it for me, like quite literally, because of obviously having the diagnosis and then not having anything in place. I think it would have been quite easy for me to justify not really doing anything about it at all because the help wasn't there. But it also brought with it the realization that actually the only person that is going to be able to do anything about it is me. And that set me on a journey of trying to find things that would work. And there was quite a lot that didn't work. But in doing that, I found some things that did. And it was a really long and quite painstaking process to get to a point where I was on the path to recovery. But I think it actually did me a lot of good to put the effort into trying those things, because on the way I picked up quite a lot of resilience and confidence in myself. So although recovery was the end goal, I still got quite a lot from the journey of doing it as well.
Yeah, I would say for me, really, I had a great experience just because can you hear me?
Yeah, there was just, I had a little bit of a delay. I don't know if anyone else did.
I did.
Okay. Oh, internet.
15 to 20 seconds.
Okay, well, I just want to say, yeah, what I was saying was, not everyone has had access to or had great experiences with DBT. And I think even if DBT is not your jam, or, you can't access it because unfortunately it can be a pretty inaccessible therapy. For me, what was really life-changing for me with DBT was that I had a therapist who was so validating and caring, and she still pushed me. Like one time I called her when I was really struggling, and she was like, Lena, I can't be your distress tolerance. Like, I care about you, and that's why I'm saying this, right? Like, she really wanted to, encourage me to use the stuff I was learning. But I think also, other than that, the community really. So I started looking up like BPD pages on Instagram, people who were really talking about recovery. And for one, it really made me feel like I wasn't alone. And also like gave me an example of like, wow, there are people out there who have survived this.
Yeah, same. I mean, the community, absolutely the same for me. And I really like what you were saying about the therapeutic relationship, because I also did DBT, and I found that my therapist relationship was just as valuable in a slightly different way. I found that, because I hate to use this word, but I used to be extremely manipulative with a lot of my therapists. I could kind of bully them into telling me what I wanted to hear. And finding a therapist who was able to have find a balance between validating me and really supporting me, but also challenging me when I was maybe not putting in the effort that I needed to, or I was crossing some kind of line. Like, she set firm boundaries with me. Like, one of the game-changing conversations that I had was when she basically said to me that I was phoning it in, and that I was only going to get as much out of the work as I was going to put into it. And that, like, no matter what they taught me, if I wasn't going to do anything, it wasn't going to do anything. And that conversation, I don't know how she knew that that was the right moment, because there are definitely times in the past where if someone had said that to me, I would have been like, F you, I'm out. Right. But she knew that it was the right time, and it was just it was the right relationship. And she was like, look, you're either going to step up or get out, because we've got a waiting list of people. Like, if you're not going to respect my time, like, I have other people waiting. And that was the first time someone had ever really stood up to me like that, in that way, in like a really loving, caring, like, I want what's best for you kind of way. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna put in the work. And then things, that was when I really started to get traction, was after that conversation.
Yeah, for me, I think I just got really tired of losing people. I mean, and actually, for me, the first therapist I got, it wasn't a very nice experience, because they were not, I don't think they were like properly trained with psychological therapy, but it was like kind of traumatizing, because I got blamed for my behavior in a very malicious way. So I kind of had a very negative reaction to that whole episode. So I kind of stopped seeing therapists for a long while, until there was a point in my life about 5 or 6 years ago when I just could not stop feeling awful without like drinking my pain away, or being so high that, like, it numbs all your senses. And my parent got really scared for me, and they sent me to see a therapist, and I got my diagnosis. But it wasn't until that I lost my bestest friend and found some of very few people, very, very important people in my life, that I actually took my recovery journey by its reins. Before that, it was, yes, I'm working on it. I'm trying to identify my triggers, but life is still, lifing. So I'm not like in much trouble. But when interpersonal relationships got in the way, when it was just easier to cut people off instead of working through our issues, and it started to get really lonely after that. So I decided that if not for anybody else, I have to get better for myself, because if I'm not going to have anybody else in my life anyway, I should have a friend in me who is able to support me when I need her, right? So that was the biggest push I could give to myself. And yeah, that was it.
I love that. Being your own friend is such an important part of the journey. At least for me, it has been. I mean, I can't say for everyone, but yeah. Knowing that you have yourself in your corner, so important.
Yeah, I don't know about for others, but I really started to feel that for me when I started to feel okay being alone, but not isolating, right? Like, I enjoyed solitude rather than isolation, where I like really just enjoyed being, I still do like enjoy being with myself, like my partner went out of town for work for a week, and I was like, oh, I really miss him and I wish he was here. And also I'm like, cool, I'm gonna like play video games and do stuff that I like to do by myself,
Yeah. Being alone, not lonely.
Yeah.
So there's one more question that I wanted to cover, and that is, so we've talked about what functional recovery looks like for you and how you got there. How did you know that you were there? Because as we've talked about, there's not like a hard line where you go from having full-blown BPD to being in recovery. So, what was how did you know that you had entered into the space of functional recovery?
I just got told, and I just got told. So So to give a little bit of context to this, it took me about 6 years to get my BPD diagnosis for one reason or another. It was quite a lengthy process. But then I got my schizotypal personality disorder after that. And it was in that appointment where they said, we believe that you have STPD, that we discussed the previous diagnosis. And actually, the psychiatrist said, you no longer meet the criteria for borderline personality disorder. Yes, you obviously still have difficulty with some traits, but you don't meet the criteria. So, it was kind of like a double-edged sword. I got rid of one personality disorder and acquired another. So it wasn't ideal, to be honest. But I think I also sensed it in myself as well, because I was going for longer periods of time of being quite comfortable with myself, of being quite stable emotionally. There was a lot of consistency with friendships and with relationships. And also I was seeking out healthier alternatives for destructive behaviors as well. So I think the best way that I could describe it is kind of feeling at peace with myself. And I almost feel like when I got the BPD diagnosis, because it was so long coming, I'd almost come out of the worst of it by the time that I got my diagnosis. So I was already on that process of recovery and healing without really knowing it, because I'd spent so long dealing with the symptoms that I don't know if any of you guys can relate to this, but I just kind of got sick of myself. And I was like, if I don't change things in my life, I'm going to be stuck like this forever. And that just seemed horrifying to me. So that's when I started to set about doing things like working on emotional intelligence, looking at, different approaches like solution focused therapy and things like that, and trying to incorporate it in. So even by the time I got that diagnosis, it almost felt redundant to me.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question a lot because I'm writing a memoir and I've been writing about a lot of the not so recovered parts. And I was thinking, like, where did it shift for me? And I think it was like, I remember a moment when I was really struggling, because I'm still a very highly emotional person. That's never going to go away, and I don't really want it to. But there was something that happened where I was really dysregulated, and I had gotten into the habit of reaching out to the hotline from Now Matters Now when I was really struggling. Not all the time, but when I had those moments where I was like, I don't think I'm going to last the night. And I reached out to them, and they were like, the person who answered, it's a text hotline, which I really liked. And they were like, are you struggling with thoughts of hurting yourself? And I was like, I'm not, actually. I'm really not. I'm feeling really dysregulated, and I just wanted to reach out to someone because this has always been a really scary thing for me in the past. But right now, I'm actually okay with surviving this. And I think that's the moment when I realized, like, I had found a life that was enough of worth living that I could last the night when nights before that I wasn't sure.
I love that. I love that so much. It makes me so happy. It's funny because I wasn't totally sure until fairly recently, which is funny because I think I'd been calling myself as being in functional recovery because I was able to withstand a lot of things that like an interpersonal conflict and resolve them without lashing out. But there was a part of me that was like, but I haven't lost any major relationships, like loss, especially like grief, like from death and those kinds of things. None of those things had happened. And I just kept thinking, maybe when one of these things happens, that will be proof that all of this is fake, that I'm not actually as skilled as I think I am. And to be completely honest, like the last 6 months have been pretty insane. I've experienced 4 losses in my life. Some of them were very close, like family members, and also had like a very, very stressful physical health problem at the end of last year for 3 months that never got diagnosed, just disappeared as mysteriously as it showed up. And was it hard? Yes. Did I struggle? Absolutely. Did I have moments where I wasn't my best self? Yes. But did like my BPD as I knew it in the past come back? No, not at all. Like there were moments where I went in that direction, but not once did I get to a point of, wanting to hurt myself or threatening to end relationships or being really vindictive and mean to people, which is how I used to handle a lot of real stress in the past. And so I think that's really been a huge moment for me, is like now I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, and now that it kind of has, and I didn't completely revert back to the person I used to be, I'm like, okay, like, yeah, there are going to be some more significant things in the future that may come up and will be really difficult. And I have a lot more confidence that I'm going to be able to handle it without, fearing that the demon is going to come back. Like, I may not be the best person ever in those moments, but that's a far cry from the person I was when I was 20.
Yeah, I think for me is when I learned to be friends with the demon. So it's like Lena said in the beginning, that recovery is not linear at all. So, there was phases in my life where I would feel like, yes, this is it. Like, I know how to regulate myself. I'm doing a spectacular job at maintaining my relationships and everything else. And I'm at the peak of my recovery. And then an episode would happen, and, all the thoughts and the unhealthy coping mechanisms would try to creep back in. And then you think that if I was actually recovered, would I be having these thoughts at all? And it's a spiral from there for me. So I was in doubt for a long, long time that have I actually recovered? Like, if they actually like test me or like take that questionnaire again when I'm having an actual episode, will I qualify as a person who has recovered? Because I didn't feel like I was. But I think it's more than that, because it's not about the episodes that you keep having. I mean, I have accepted that I will keep getting triggered. It's important to identify those triggers. I mean, what caused that demon? And it's just, to like sit quietly with myself and listen to my thoughts and then watch it go away. I mean, your thoughts and feelings does not have to define you. I mean, it can be there and you can observe them and you can acknowledge them, and they just disappear. I mean, there doesn't have to actively do anything. And then I did not have to have an impulsive once I was feeling bad about something that happened in my relationship, or I did not need to impulsively call my friend and call them 1,000 ugly names because they did something that I did not like. And when I that got to that phase where I could take the pause, think before I act, I actually realized that yes, maybe I can do this. I mean, I can deal with the whole BPD thing. I mean, it doesn't mean the symptoms won't come back. I mean, it will come back, but I definitely have been dealing with it way better. Like, you don't give into those ineffective mechanisms anymore. I mean, you learn to do better and you stick with it, and it's hard, but it's doable.
Well, we wanted to make sure that we kept our cast discussion relatively short so we could give lots of time for Q&A. So I just want to say thank you everyone so much for watching. We hope you got a nugget of wisdom to take with you on your journey. And with that, let's open up the Q&A so we can engage with our audience, which we very rarely get to do since our episodes are all pre-recorded.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You guys are absolutely amazing. I related to so many things you were saying, and it was such an interesting conversation, and I'm sure there was a lot of people relating as well. We do have a lot of questions, so people are very involved. We might not be able to get to all the questions, but I'm going to start reading some of the questions and we'll go from there. So thank you all so much for being here. I love watching the BPD Bunch. Question for Madhurima. What type of healthcare professional are you, and does your BPD diagnosis affect your work?
So I am currently working as a junior resident in one of the government hospitals in Kolkata, but I'm a bit off work because I resigned recently and I'm taking the time off to study for my entrance examinations, which is basically like if you want to specialize in a certain field, like if you want to go for residency in medicine, residency in surgery, so you have to give an exam. So I'm preparing for that exam so I can do my specialty. And yes, it does because things in India, it's like it's still a long way from being good, especially mental health wise. And the people in my workplace, they're not so educated or aware or welcoming of something that they're not like, aware of. If I go and tell them that, these are the things that I need because I have a particular set of requirement or boundaries, I'm most likely to get reprimanded for it. So it does affect my line of work, but that's where the self-regulation comes in more often than not because I have to keep reminding myself that I do it for myself and not for other people to, pat me on the back and say that you're doing a good job. So if I have to survive in that environment, then I have to be there for myself. And it's a constant reminder that I have to give myself that it's worth it because there are people. I have friends, I have like an amazing partner, I have very supportive family members who actually get it, and they have been with me. And me, a lot of them did not know about BPD, but they have tried their best to learn about what it is and how they can help me, and that means the world to me. So yeah, it's manageable.
Thank you so much. Wow. I'm going to move on to another question. Did you find that your functional recovery included a peer support group, such as the ones offered by Emotions Matter? Question for anybody.
I can honestly, well, no. For me, I would say no because I didn't really know that that was even an option. I think that after becoming involved in the sort of BPD community online and making friends, having those connections, those personal relationships is probably similar to the effect of a peer support group. But for me, I just made actual, like personal connections with people. And, so like half of my best friends all have BPD, and like it's just like supporting each other is part of our friendship and our life at this point.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, for me, it was actually Xannie and Lena because I heard them talk in Better Cope. I mean, I was very initial part of my functional recovery, and I was like, very desperate to look for people who also had the same experience, and I found these two in Better Cope, and I immediately started following them over Instagram, and I saw Xannie doing this whole ad thing because she wanted to start this whole group, and I reached out, and now look at where we are. So yeah, they have been really helpful. I mean, it was April 2021, and I think they were the first people I listened to who actually got it.
You're gonna make me cry. I love you so much. Okay, sorry.
That's awesome. I just want to say something related to this. If you want to contact some people in this conference today, you can actually click on your personal profile in the upper right corner of the screen, and you can fill out your profile, and you can toggle on the privacy setting to allow users to connect with you. And then in the blue panel on the left side, there's you can click on conference attendees, and you can find different people, and you can try to connect with them. If they answer you, then that's great. There's no guarantees, obviously, but that is an option. And I also want to say that, if you don't have friends like these amazing people here, the support groups are absolutely incredible for me, for obviously, everybody I know at Emotions Matter. So definitely, if you haven't been to an Emotions Matter support group, please come at least once. You're gonna love it. So that I just needed to add my little thing in there. But Lena and Katja, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or should I move on to the next question? No? Okay. So for those of you in therapy or who have been in therapy, do you think you'll need therapy your entire life to manage BPD off and on? How did you determine it was time to end therapy and try things on your own?
I definitely still work. I actually still work with the same therapist from way back in stage 1 DBT. Because the thing is like, while my BPD is managed, right? Now it's just life, which has its own new stuff, right? Like there's always kind of things I'm needing support with. And I think, to be honest, I built, my therapist and I kind of joke that we have like a mother-daughter relationship. Cause like we went through some stuff together, and I'm just kind of attached, and we both know that, and we're honest about it. But, I definitely don't see myself moving on from therapy anytime soon.
Yeah, same. I think, and for me, it's the same. It's not about managing BPD. It's more about life, because, and I am of the belief, I think everyone should have a therapist. And if no other reason, then most people, BPD or not, have thoughts that, may or may not, like, you think things that you don't actually believe all the time. We all do this, right? And I find having a therapist is so valuable, because I can test out the things that I think with another person who's not actually a part of my life. So that way I can talk out some of the things that I might want to say to someone who's in my personal life without actually having, because like, I don't want to say to someone, oh, I don't want to be your friend anymore, and then realize, oh, there was something else going on that made me, because I can't take that back once I say that to somebody. And so because the therapist is sort of, by definition, like outside of your personal life, it's a great way to test out those things. And I mean, my therapist took BPD off my chart 2 years ago. So it's not about BPD. It's just life and trying to grow to be better all the time.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I'm still seeing the therapist who diagnosed me, and it's been 5.5 years, and it's more about, like, somebody to keep you grounded. I mean, sometimes like they said, it's about handling life, and also to get a subjective view, because we all know sometimes some of us, like, can get too much inside of our heads. So, I mean, being regular with my therapy has definitely helped me stay, like, in the phase of recovery, and I think has helped me grow better. So, and I don't think, I don't want to stop going to therapy at any point soon. So,
Anybody else? Do you mind if I jump in with my own answer? So it is possible not to need therapy anymore. I don't really do therapy anymore. I take medication. I'm not thinking about going off medication, I will tell you that. But I talk to, my medication manager once in 3 months, once a month, depending on what I need. And I have my therapist's number in case I need it, which is maybe once a year or so. And it's fantastic. So it is possible. I just want to say that. I think, I agree with everybody. Like, therapy is something that you might as well keep on doing. I think it's great for everybody, even if you don't have BPD, but I'm just saying that in my case, like, it is possible. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I wouldn't say, like, I don't think I don't know if any of us need it. It's just, it's having the person to talk to can be beneficial. But like, if my therapist called me tomorrow and was like, I'm quitting, I probably wouldn't go find another therapist because it's more about that connection that I have built with her and the rapport that we have.
That makes a lot of sense. That's really good. The rapport is so big in this case. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. Any suggestions for future clinicians on how to frame recovery/management/healing to clients?
I think like we've said, I think for me, the most important parts to remember about recovery are that it's not a black and white thing. It's not a linear thing. And like Xannie said in the beginning, I think what recovery means is different to all of us, right? So like Sara, you said you feel like you're at the point where you don't need a therapist anymore, right? For me, you know, I think that there's still like kind of new things for me to tackle in my life, right? And so I think like for each of us, it's a thing we define on our own. So I think that's the most important thing I'd say about that.
I think the only thing that I would add is that, I mean, this is becoming less and less of a thing, but when I was diagnosed, it was in 2004, I was 15, and most clinicians said, not much we can do, good luck, like you're probably not going to make it. So, you know, I think, not that that's super common, but like, I think just letting people know that it is possible. You know, I think that's the bare minimum, the standard. And beyond that, it's all the things that Lena said. But I just wanted to put that out there because it does still happen sometimes.
Anything else? All right. Here's somebody who's looking for a suggestion. Let's see what we can come up with. My daughter denies having BPD. What should I do? It's a little tough question, but if you guys can tackle that.
I mean, I don't know. Lane, you want to take this one?
I'd say it's kind of a tough question to answer because I don't know if your daughter actually does have BPD, because I think the thing is you know, as a clinician who works with BPD, there's such Venn diagram of multiple different diagnoses. So whether or not someone, to me also diagnosis is a very subjective thing even beyond that. So it's complicated. So, you know, I wonder if like accepting a diagnosis of BPD is really, for one, that, you know, that important to this person, but also like important to recovery. I mean, we're here talking about BPD, but there's a lot of people out there in the world who struggle with emotional dysregulation, struggle with interpersonal dysregulation, all these different things that don't necessarily have BPD, don't meet the criteria, whatever. I've had clients who come to me and I have no problem if people are like, I think I have a BPD diagnosis. And I'm like, I think you do. Let's talk about it. I've definitely had clients who come to me who they're like, I think I have BPD. And I, you know, after working with them, I'm like, you don't have BPD. Like, you know, so I think it's complicated and hard to answer without knowing the situation more deeply.
I get this question all the time. Usually it's like, how do I make somebody accept that they have a problem? And I'm like, you don't. It's not up to you. Like, because, and I say this as somebody who for many years was like, screw you guys, you're all the ones with the problem, I don't have anything wrong with me, right? Like, there are certainly things you can, like, I think it's you know, having truthful, honest, vulnerable conversations with the people you care about is always like a great way to start. But at the end of the day, like, if someone does have BPD, it's up to them to accept it or not. And I do think that, like, it's important that, like, people on the outside recognize that you cannot force somebody to accept something that they are not ready or willing to accept. Period. End of story. As hard as that is, I know that's not the answer that most people want to hear, because they don't want to feel helpless. You want to feel like there is something you can do, but it's up to each of us to get to a point of acceptance of where we are, if that is the case.
Thank you. You tackled a tough one. Appreciate it. So another question is, some of you talked about taking a step back in interpersonal conflicts. Do you have any strategies in your recovery for sitting with the discomfort of not reacting and also catching that need to take a step back?
Co-regulating has worked wonders for me. So like I mentioned earlier, I've had to, really step out and be vulnerable with people in my life, especially my partner, and say like, they know I have BPD and they know, what that means. And, I've had to say like, there are moments where I get really dysregulated and sometimes I need a little help. Right. And, being able to in that moment say like, I just need you to hug me, or can we, do something to calm down together, I think has been amazing for me. And again, like sitting with the discomfort and not reacting, but it's teaching me how to not split, because usually when I get dysregulated in interpersonal situations, it's because I'm starting to split and I'm like, well, screw this person, screw me, screw everybody, but instead I'm like, I actually am going to reach and lean into the relationship rather than pull away and say like, hey, I'm really struggling. And I'm very fortunate to have a partner and friendships in my life that are able to support that. But that's also why there's great program like Family Connections is great for helping people in your life kind of understand how to support you and things like that, so that they will know what to do in those moments.
I think one of the biggest things has been being able to, to tackle that, how do you know when to take a step back part of the question. I mean, I think for me, being able to identify what certain emotions feel like in my body and at what point, what is the physical body sensation that sort of precedes me sort of losing control. Like as an example, anger tends to feel like a strong heat in my chest. And if it starts moving from my chest to my extremities, that's when I know I have a couple of seconds to take a step back, or I'm going to start hurling insults or being venomous to people. But until I really practice mindfulness and being really in my body, and I think for a lot of people with BPD, being in your body is really difficult because that's being with your emotions, and because your emotions are in your body too. It's like hard to sit with that. But that's probably one of the big things. And then with sitting with it, it's a combination of distress tolerance and distraction. And Elaine, I think you said this in an episode once, that like you don't need to be like trying to force yourself to be in your feelings all the time, because of how, it can be exhausting. So like distraction is okay, at times, to like give yourself a break from sitting with those feelings and, then jumping back into it. And for me, the things that work for distraction are just things that occupy as many of my senses as possible. So usually that's watching a show while also doing something with my hands that involves active work, like making something or drawing something or whatever.
Yeah, I think also to handle the discomfort of like not reacting, how I handle it is that, that's where the skills really come in. So I use some of the BPD skills that I've learned, like stop and take a pause, and like immediately if something is triggering and angering an episode, and be, you have to identify your triggers. Once you identify your triggers and you know that an episode is gonna be like, here any second, so you just like stop, take a pause, like ask that person that I need to be alone right now. I mean, that's what I do. And then I would just sit with my thoughts for a while. I would use my wise mind skill and look at how much of my reaction is logical and how much of my reaction is something that my emotional mind is warranting. And maybe a few minutes into that, after my anger or my emotions have calmed down a bit, things would genuinely seem a lot easier to communicate. Like it doesn't have to be a full-blown verbal war. It can be a mature adult quiet conversation. It does not have to be something very explosive. So it also helps me to like dissociate that discomfort, because
I'm just going to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize this was going to go on so long. I have to finish we're at 1:59, so I have to finish this. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to, so, thank you so much on behalf of Emotions Matter. Thank you all the panelists for sharing and for this insightful discussion. Thank you to all the attendees for the questions. I'm really sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. If you have an individual question that wasn't answered, you can connect with the presenters in the profiles like I had described earlier. Or you can email us at info@emotionsmatterbpd.org. There are resources which are downloadable links related to this topic at the end of the screen. And also, we invite you to make a donation to Emotions Matter to support our mission. We cannot do this without your help. If you're enjoying this conference, please contribute to help us continue our very important work. Also, join us at our Walk for BPD on June 2nd in New York City, or walk virtually. For more information, please visit our website, www.emotionsmatter.com, emotionsmatterbpd.com. We are at 2:00. Thank you so much, everybody. This was amazing. And thank you to everybody who was here in the group. Bye-bye.
Bye.